one here. All right. Hey, welcome to the Go for CEO channel, everybody. Thank you again for coming to the community, learning about startups, entrepreneurs, CEOs, founders, people that are making things happen in the world and in America. And today I have a very special guest. Once again, I try to pluck these guys and gals out of this LinkedIn world, out of other social media spaces, out of referrals, stuff like that. And, this gentleman, Jeremy Bollington, is in the true class of entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is technically going to be our first intrapreneur as well as entrepreneur, sharing with you the marketing, the operations, the scaling, and how he really thought of himself going from the corporate world, and I won't steal all of his thunder, of banking 25 years, making that switch to that entrepreneur mindset and being driven by a mindset. So hey, don't forget, subscribe, like that channel, and like this channel, and leave a comment for Jeremy. I'm sure he'll interact with you. Search for him on some of the information I'll put below. But without further ado, Mr. Jeremy Bollington, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome, Jeremy. Well, thanks so much. We met obviously through a quick DM. I got into your DM and said, hey, we're connected to similar people. I had Michael Reeder on and saw the things that you're doing, and obviously was intrigued because you're truly that entrepreneur, intrapreneur. So we'd like to start with kind of your background. Why don't you tell the Go for CEO community a little bit of who you were, in those corporate worlds, and then also who you became over the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. And I definitely didn't start life as an entrepreneur. I spent 25 years in the banking world. Grew up in the UK, went to school there, and then got into banking, worked for one of the big UK banks, Midland Bank, which then became HSBC in London, and then had the chance in '97 to move to New York. That was supposed to be for 3 years. And 20 plus years later, we're still here. My wife and I, we had 2 kids at the time, literally a 3-year-old and a like 6-7 week old, as we moved to New York. So that was kind of crazy. I think within probably 6 months of landing in New York, we both said, not sure we see ourselves going back to live and work in the UK. 20 plus years later, we're still here. My banking career, I was dealing primarily, certainly when I came to the US and the whole time in the US, was dealing with large sort of Fortune 250, 500 companies, kind of running relationships with them, delivering the banking firm, kind of coordinating product providers and providing services around the world. I was with HSBC through the craziness of 2008, kind of increasing, responsibilities, ran teams, and got headhunted in 2011 by another British bank, Standard Chartered. Decided that it was time for a change, so made that move, and had 3 great years. I had my boss was in Singapore. It was sort of 24/7. You'd be on conference calls 3-4 in the morning, because nobody cared about what the US guys were doing in terms of time zone and everything. The bank was very Asia centric. So that was kind of, it was fun. I was running basically the North American and Latin American business for them from a client perspective. And then the bank ran into some challenges, and everybody at my level pretty much got either their jobs were eliminated or, in some cases they found other positions, but my job was eliminated. And so for the first time in, 25 plus years, like, shoot, I'm unemployed, which was we'd done well financially. My back to my kids, my youngest had just left home for college. And so my wife and I have been thinking about, what even before anything happened, Stan Chart, we were thinking about what next, and do we go and live? We'd always lived in the suburbs of New Jersey. I commuted into New York, and we were thinking about moving into the city, and then that happened, and we decided we'd been building a house down in Charleston, South Carolina, and we decided maybe it's time to go, get out of banking and go do something else. And I looked, at what was in the banking world, but somehow didn't feel like I wanted to go build another team doing the same thing. And then, part of that, I think I was starting to think that, life's too short to just kind of go through the motions and do it for the money. It was, I started to think more and more about maybe I should, go and actually experience kind of running a small business, start from scratch. And so that led me to, we'd pretty much made the decision to move. Banking wasn't an option down here. I had no background in, the types of banking that you're involved in. And I just didn't want to do that here. And so we started to look for a business, and, I looked at what was for sale. There wasn't really anything that, felt sensible. I definitely knew I didn't have enough good ideas or any good ideas to come up with like a business to start myself. And so, that kind of led me to, I guess, the middle ground of franchising, where, let's be clear, you're still starting a business. I mean, there's a ton of risk, but you've at least got, kind of a system, support from the franchisor. You've got that franchisee community that's if you find the right system, is very supportive. And so, kind of long story short, we looked at a whole bunch of different businesses, ended up doing 2 franchises in the beauty personal care space, because I felt that it was something I could build somewhat crazily, and I would never recommend it to anybody. We decided to kind of open these 2 businesses at the same time, because we found you've seen my LinkedIn stuff. I mean, we found a site that could accommodate the first locations for each of them side by side, and so build out kind of happened at the same time. I think one business opened one week in February, the other business opened the following weekend. That was crazy. And then since then it's been a story of building that, navigating through this last crazy 12 months of 10 months of COVID, and then launching a consulting business, which obviously I can talk about separately, but that's probably enough in terms of how I got to this point.
I love it. And the journey is real, right? So many people, man or woman, journeying through their career, putting in 5, 10, 15, 25 years. I mean, that's kind of a rarity as well, to hear that someone that's stuck around in an industry specifically. Now, you've done a complete 180 in a sense of industries, right? From banking to a small, more retail business, waxing the city and blow dry, and that's in South Carolina, correct?
Yeah, we're in Charleston.
Charleston. Yeah. Okay, awesome. So I mean, what a different world. I bet a little bit, even somewhat humbling. I mean, obviously you were dealing with 250 Fortune 500 type companies, probably big boardroom scenarios, and and intellectual conversations about capital ratios and capex and and EBITDA and all these types of things that are banker lingos, right? And now you're in this retail shop, going in and dealing with neighborhood people that need a wax or need a blow dry for their cool wedding that they're going to, or the night out with their hubby, right? So stuff like that. So it's interesting, and I appreciate you sharing that. So tell us a little bit about kind of some of the industries that you narrowed down. So maybe the top 3 industries that you narrowed down, and then some of the ways that you literally, realize, okay, how do I incorporate, did you get a good accountant? Did you interview a good lawyer? What were some of those dynamics?
Yeah, no, good question. I think, in terms of the narrowing down, I worked with a franchise consultant, to kind of, I did my own research as well, obviously, but, kind of going through that element of trying to figure out what are you trying to achieve? What businesses might achieve those goals? And I think I was looking for something where, I wasn't going to be kind of the, buried in the business day to day, if that makes sense. And I think there are a number of great businesses out there that are, more sort of like service orientated in terms of, kind of, a team of guys, kind of technicians in trucks, delivering, whether it's home services or services to businesses. And I just sort of, it felt like those were going to be much more sales orientated, and I didn't want to be, kind of the sales guy kind of doing that. And so I was sort of leaning more towards finding something where, you're essentially, and I was looking for a model where, I was going to have managers in place, that are managing the business day to day, and I'm managing the managers. And that doesn't mean so you're not understanding the business, but clearly I'm not the one doing the waxing. Trust me, nobody would want that happening. But you have you need to understand what the underlying product is and the nuances and that. But I'm not managing my estheticians day to day in the waxing business, and the same in the blow dry business. But what you are doing as an owner is you need to understand the dynamics of the business. Typically you're in those types of businesses, you're very much involved in the marketing side, because that's and a lot of that's obviously these are B2C businesses, so a lot of that marketing is digital. But understanding that the franchisors typically will have agencies that kind of work across the franchise, but there's still lots of decision points to be made in terms of how you're doing that. So I spent a lot of time trying to get under the skin of that, because that in those businesses, the success parts to it really, I think you've got to deliver a great service. So that's having the right team, having that team managed correctly, and setting goals. And then you've got to get customers in. And some of those things go together, because obviously if the team's providing a great service and experience, the customers are coming in, they're coming back, they're telling their friends. But you've got to get that marketing piece done. And I definitely spent a lot of time on that. I think in terms of your question on the advisors, it was kind of interesting. That was probably one of the things I think about, like transition from the corporate world. It took me probably, and if I were doing it again, I'd probably approach it in a different way now. But it definitely took me a while to adjust from, you'd kind of come out of an environment where you had a big budget, you were dealing with billion-dollar deals, and you treated that as though it was your money in terms of making decisions. You weren't frivolous with it. But it was very different when it really was your money that you're writing the checks for. And I think one example, when I first started out, from an accounting bookkeeping perspective, I got a couple of recommendations, because I was I'd moved to a new city that we didn't know anybody, and I ended up working with using one of the bigger firms, local firms in town. But what I realized over 6 to 9 months after we got rolling and the businesses open, was that, heck, this is costing me a lot of money. And is there a better, a cheaper way to do what is ultimately a very simplified set of books? Because why do I need those? I need them from a tax perspective. Yes, I need to know the results of the business, but most of that is coming out of the point of sale systems that are widely used in beauty type businesses. You can run every possible report from a revenue perspective, and metrics for the business. So I didn't need a bookkeeping firm to do that stuff for me. I just needed a bookkeeping firm to get me, numbers and results that were acceptable from a tax reporting and year-end P&L perspective. So I think it took me a while to sort of dial back and go, like, what, every dollar counts when it's your business and you're running it, and to really sort of dial in on that stuff. Probably it was about 6 months in, I'm like, I got to go cut some cost here and squeeze it a bit.
That's awesome.
Well, so you go through that transition,
For sure. Yeah. You're talking about process, right? And making sure that you reconnect with the dots. One area that you mentioned there was, you take a guy like yourself, highly successful in the corporate world, managing teams, probably a bit of a, not micromanager, but, kind of having a pulse of where everything's going. Like you said, you may have had $1 billion budget, but you treated it like your own, and now you're on your own with your own money. really trying to detail that. Tell us a little bit about the process of how you started to bring on teammates, because I think one of the traps that business owners that go from corporate to entrepreneur is actually that sole proprietor trap, right?
Mhm.
Where you
Mhm.
go from employee of trading hours for dollars, maybe salaried and all that good stuff and all the benefits. You go to sole proprietor, but then you don't really ever get the business owner like Kiyosaki talks about, because you don't know how to form a team, but you had teams. So was there a process of how you interviewed? You're in a new city, you don't know the client, or you don't know the talent base. What are some things that you share that you could share about that?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think, it's interesting because it definitely evolves, I think, because if you think about it, when you're opening a business, particularly your first business, or in my case, two businesses at the same time, um, you know, you don't know. I mean, it's sort of, if I reflect on when I was hiring in the banking world, I knew exactly what I was
Mhm.
looking for, because I knew I'd kind of come up through that world. And so I think, yeah, one of the hard things out of the gate, I think, for anybody that's starting a business, and I think this is one of the definitely one of the benefits of a franchise versus starting a business yourself, is that you've got that sort of that guidance in terms of what do if you're a fitness business or a beauty business, as in my case, there's here's the sort of like the job description for a studio manager or a general manager in a fitness concept. And so you've got some guidance on that. And I think I leaned, pretty heavily on that, because like, what the hell did I know about hiring a manager for a waxing studio? I mean,
Mhm.
and that was, I think what I did on my side was focus more on, what was my gut feel for that individual in terms of, um, their overall makeup, and how did I feel about that person in terms of the experience they'd had, the direct sort of relationship. I would always interview somebody two or three for those first roles. I think I met my studio manager at our waxing was probably three times before I hired her.
Wow.
Wanting to kind of really, like, this is somebody that's going to be really important. Now the interesting, that was 4 years ago. She still works for us.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
it's kind of, so got that one right.
Yeah.
Probably been through a couple of managers on my blow dry business, so maybe we sort of failed a bit there. But it is interesting when you're putting somebody in positions when you don't kind of wholly understand what that flow is going to be like. And part of it was people always talk about hiring people that are smarter than you. I think in these types of businesses, that's a little bit difficult in those, because those roles are not, they're not huge roles. But what I was very clear on was I wanted somebody that knew, the business and the industry, because I knew there was a whole bunch of stuff that, I wasn't necessarily going to know the answers to, but I needed somebody that did. And that was, I think as I reflect on that, that's, I think what we were, more focused on doing.
So were there tools, just to go deeper on this subject? I think it's really interesting because you're talking about a retail type business, and the talent pool that you're needing to get to so that you could step away and be the
Mm-hmm.
CEO per se of the business. So was there any tools, hiring websites? Did you mostly network within the community, your contacts? What were some ways that you brought that talent to
Yeah,
interviewing two or three times?
it was using the hiring websites out there. I think originally, I think the waxing franchise was using a platform called Hirology, which was
Mm.
kind of, it would speak to the brand and the culture and that, so you didn't have to build this thing from scratch. There was already kind of a pre-built out, here's what waxing the city is, built by the franchisor. And then it's kind of, it would post ads on Indeed, and some of the other job boards. And I'd say that's, in that world, Indeed is probably now, I mean, that's what we use now. Typically it's the go-to kind of platform. And it's, it's relatively cost effective. I mean, you can, we very rarely will sponsor jobs. It's, we use the free version of it, and it works most of the time.
Nice. Nice. So
So,
you
but that's
figured out.
back to that cost. That's back to that cost effectiveness. you
Sure,
know?
sure. I mean, you have to, like you said, watch every penny, understand kind of where the dynamics are of how you want to spend. So that leads us, I think, a nice transition into, what were some of your approaches? I mean, you open up a retail store, which is one type of business. You're not necessarily going to places to do your work. You're waiting for people to walk into your place. It's called waxing the city and blow dry, right? So, I mean,
Yep.
somewhat apparent. I mean, if I was driving down the street and I looked over, oh, okay, I can get my waxing, I can get my my wife probably blow dry. I don't know if men do the blow dry stuff, but um, so what were some techniques, some things that you picked up maybe from the corporate world, or did you have to just kind of redo it yourself with the franchise model of SEO and,
Yep.
were you networking, were you just going to chambers of commerce and stuff like the old school, just, pound the pavement stuff. Tell us a little bit about the marketing side.
Yeah, that's and I think very little of that came from my corporate world because it was just so different to what you were doing then. I think it was a combination of kind of input and insight from the franchisor in terms of the digital piece and using using agencies that they were partnered with. So that was both obviously the establishment of your local website, the SEO around that was done by the corporate team. So I didn't have to worry too much about that. Although obviously there are elements around that, Google reviews, Yelp reviews, getting encouraging customers to and putting processes in place to have the team kind of ask customers to give reviews, because that obviously helps the ranking. And then, kind of, I spent a lot of time trying to understand, Facebook ads, pay-per-click, but not executing that myself, but feeling like I could actually have a sensible conversation with the digital agencies to kind of, to challenge them on the results and how do we optimize it. And then I think the interesting part, so my wife is very involved with the blow dry business. She would do more of that Chamber of Commerce stuff. I joined the Chamber of Commerce, but a guy sort of, sitting at the table talking to a lady next to him about her hair, that's kind of, that you had to be a little bit careful on some of those conversations. But I think the other part on the community side was using things like the chamber to kind of the ribbon cutting. They would do meetings, kind of networking meetings. We kind of held some of those at the locations, working those kind of contacts to just to get that word out. And then I get, ultimately those businesses kind of build through, it's back to what I said earlier about, kind of making sure you got a team in place that's delivering, a great service, great product, and building it that way. One thing that you touched on about when you were talking about the banking world, and kind of going from a business that, you were intellectually challenged every day, all day, because of the level of clients and complexity of what you were dealing with. I think that was one of the reasons I ended up kind of getting into the franchise consulting world, was that having built these businesses, having, in the case of the blow dry business where I'm also a developer for them, having sold a number of locations and got those businesses up and running. I was starting to feel that element of, okay, so I have managers in place. These things are, yes, there's still work to be done to grow them and to challenge the teams and that, but it wasn't taking a huge amount of my time. And I thought about, did I look for another franchise, or do I want to do something different? And I think as I looked at other businesses, what struck me was, what was I missing from, or feel that there was a gap in what I was doing, and it was that sort of intellectual challenge, I think, because I think those retail type businesses that yes, there's a steep learning curve at the outset, but once you kind of figure it out, then it's about execution then. And I think that was what sort of, led me to kind of pivot to say, I think I can take my experiences of, making a transition from the corporate world, being a franchisee, going through that business establishment, set up and running, and help people that were, kind of looking at that similar transition, and at the same time, have that intellectual challenge of, needing to get a much better feel for a very broad range of franchise businesses to be able to, help people find the right business. And then secondly, that intellectual challenge of helping, figuring out with an individual what's going to be the right fit, what's the right business. And so, yeah, that's partly what, when I reflect on, I wouldn't say I've gone full circle because it's definitely still very different to the banking world. But I feel like I've sort of gone back to that, to some extent, to that deal doing, world that I was in the banking world.
Well, you took that pendulum swing, right? You went over here, come all the way back, and then kind of have teetered almost to that middle ground where it seems like, yeah, you rooted yourself back into, all right, well, what drives me? What's the passion? Like what did I actually really enjoy about that world that I left? And now you've kind of situated yourself, which is nice. Go for CEO community. This is literally our first intrapreneur as well. So he went from the corporate world, him and his wife are basically empty nesting. Just to recap here, finds a franchise model that he kind of is that middle ground. He didn't want to, start something new that he created and his wife, but they found that middle ground of franchising. And now you just shared that incredible story of, how you did it, what you did to open up, what type of scaling, what type of people are you working with. But then the light bulb comes on and goes, you know what, I need a little bit extra. And now you go to that intrapreneur spirit side, which is using some of the attributes that you had before of that intellectual conversation of understanding how you can kind of lead someone to where they need to go at some of the leadership positions that you had. So why don't we dive into that side of things? You've got waxing the city, you've got blow dry, your wife's kind of managing that as well. And you've systematized some things, you've got some processes going, but now boom, now you're an intrapreneur inside of a company. Tell us a little bit about that partnership. I know that you kind of detailed it as a partner offline. What's going on with that, and what are some attributes that you feel have now added more value to what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So I started to think about franchise consulting probably 12 months ago, maybe 12, 15 months ago. Started to research it, and then as the world kind of like ground to a halt in February or March, our businesses were closed by the state, kind of late March, and so I think I sort of said to myself, you know what, I'm not going to just sit around. Once I'd figured out PPP and the other government support systems and that, then I'm like, it would be a shame to kind of waste this period of time and not, do something, because once those businesses were shuttered and we're just waiting on, kind of when will we be allowed to reopen. I had a month and a half of downtime, and I ended up partnering with an existing consultant, lady called Jane Stein, who's got a great reputation in the franchise consulting world, and she had a company known as Your Franchise is Waiting. And so I'm an independent contractor kind of operating under her umbrella. And it's been a lot of fun. I mean, we're what, 7, 8 months into that now. Just learned a ton of stuff in a short period of time. I think brought some interesting things to her as well, in terms of how we approach clients, how we do things. But we're having a lot of fun. I mean, the pipeline is, I've used LinkedIn extensively. I've obviously got a big network in the banking world, and then use LinkedIn also as a lead generation tool. And it's been crazy. I mean, just I think COVID, has, in many ways, a little bit like I went through, of thinking about what next and using that time. I think, the number of individuals that are working from home, I'm primarily, talking to people in the financial services world. I think it's given, either it's given them pause to think, maybe I don't want to continue in this. I'm actually liking being at home and not being on a plane half of the time. Or, there are people that are thinking, you know what, maybe it's, maybe my goal is to get out of the banking world in 5 years' time, but I don't have a plan as to how I'm going to do that. Yes, I'm building wealth by, I'm being paid well, I've got a good job, but if I leave, that stops, and so there are a lot of people that are looking and thinking about other businesses that I can get into with the support of a franchisor, that can be run on a semi-absentee basis, that I can put a manager in place. And that's obviously there are a lot of franchises that say that they can be run like that. The key is obviously, finding the ones that truly can be run like that, and finding and talking to franchisees that have done it in that way, and making sure that it works. And we're spending a lot of time helping people, think through that in particular. I think COVID has definitely spurred a lot of those thoughts, I think.
It's interesting. I kind of thought to myself, well, really, there's only a couple ways, right? It's either sweat equity, you leave and you put in that grind and you start making things happen and figure it out, or like you're saying, you've got some money, you've been a professional, kind of like you did, right? Your corporate world, you were smart about some things with your own finances that allowed you that gap of time, right? So you're completely right. I think over the last year, especially with COVID, Go for CEO community, if you're seeing this a couple of years from now, this was 2020. Today we're in 2021, but certainly a lot of mind shifts, a lot of things that, drove people. So tell us a little bit about kind of how you're operating things now, right? So we like to talk about operations. You're juggling obviously the entrepreneurial side, but you've got some leadership and management in place. You've got some good 2 businesses now running. You've got the intrapreneur side that you now developed that relationship over the 9 months. Where's the operations look like? Like, what are you doing? What tools are you using?
Yep, no, that's a really good question. If I maybe sort of started by answering, where I spend my time, because I would say it's probably 10% of my time on the actual operational businesses. So that's managing the managers that are in place. I probably spend 10% of my time supporting my franchisees at below. So I've got 5 people that have open locations. I've got another one that's looking for space right now, but that's that universe. And that obviously varies. I mean, through COVID, the time spent there kind of went up as we're all trying to help each other figure out PPP and other support programs. And then the rest, I would say, it's probably 80% of my time on the franchise consulting. And I would say, so thinking about systems there, it's all about kind of the CRM system, your system of kind of what are you doing to generate leads. A lot of that is LinkedIn. I use a third-party company for LinkedIn lead generation. So I'm creating some of the content, but then that third-party company, and actually I'm making a switch to a new third-party company, partly because I wanted to I learned a whole load of stuff from the first one I used. I'm going to see how somebody else does it differently, and then take the best practices from those. But essentially, they use Sales Navigator to connect with people in my sort of target audience. So again, I'm really trying to connect with people in the financial services world, because I feel like I have, when I speak to somebody there, either my story sort of resonates with them, or I can be on the same wavelength in terms of what they're going through, what they're thinking about. And so that kind of runs away in the background. It pops up, some great contacts, and then I jump in and hopefully get into a conversation with the individual. So that's kind of the lead generation side that I'm primarily focused on. And then it's having that efficient CRM system in terms of taking those leads and then having a, somewhat automated system that's, drip campaigns for email, kind of trigger campaigns that if somebody's, if we're actively working with a client, where are we in that process, and kind of having a pretty consistent process to take them through. So it's kind of, it's pretty simple, really. But it was, for me, being able to partner with somebody that already had certainly that CRM system in place, and standardized emails for that first contact for the for the various stages of our pipeline, just made getting going on that and tweaking that a little bit, but getting going on that much easier than it would have been if I'd started from scratch.
Interesting, right? And you keep on going back to that, right? You're just leaving those little nuggets for the Go for CEO community, is that franchise model. Ladies and gentlemen, when you are really researching of where you want to go to, how to become a CEO of your life, how to become the CEO of a business, entrepreneur, founder, sometimes looking at a model that's already existing, it's something there's something established, and you create those relationships. It could be something very beneficial, like it was for Jeremy and his wife. So tell us, Jeremy, I mean, as we kind of end the interview, we like to always share, the C is for client experience, the E is for employee engagement, and the O is for operational excellence. And you've kind of touched on every one of those areas, but I always like to give the guest a kind of a say on, hey, what makes, maybe your blow blow dry and waxing the city model and those two businesses, along with your intrapreneur side of things, what makes you guys that value proposition the best in the business for client experience?
Yep, no, that's a good one. I would say for those two, kind of operational businesses, I think it's ultimately the client, the experience that my team is giving the client. I mean, I think, we get phenomenal reviews. The brand positioning of both of those businesses is high end, and to be at the the top end of their relevant their niches in the business, in the beauty industry. And I think the team delivers that every day, and we really focus on that in terms of if there is in those odd instances a client issue that somebody is immediately, whether it's in the case of the blow dry business, it will usually be my wife reaching out. In the case of the waxing business, it'd be my studio manager, reaching out to solve whatever the problem was. So I think that customer experience is just, those businesses live and die based on customer reviews and customer feedback. So you have to be focused on that. I think in my franchise consulting business, it's really what I'm focused on is I'm not trying to sell somebody on a franchise. I'm trying to help them find the right business for them. And the fee model there is I essentially get paid a placement fee by a franchisor if somebody invests in a specific franchise. But that business, over time, the most successful consultants are the ones that build that business through referral. And by that, it means, somebody that I've placed either coming back saying, I'm looking for a second business. I mean, that's the ultimate vote of confidence. Or, sending a friend who, when they tell them, hey, I found this, but I would not have found this business without Jeremy's help. Because that's the reality is, if somebody's looking for a franchise, there are 3,000 plus franchises out there. Where do you start? And so that's really what we try to do. So that customer experience is, we're not trying to sell you on a franchise. We're trying to help you find the right fit. And if we feel that you're not going to be a good fit, we do some psychometric assessments of our customers early, the early stage of working with them. And every now and again, it'll either say that somebody's too entrepreneurial, which means they're not going to follow the system. Because in franchising, yes, you're an entrepreneur, but you've got to follow the system. Because if you don't follow the system, what's the point of buying into the franchise? But there are some people that will not do that. Their profile says that they're just it's their way or the highway. And we got to tell people that, it's like you're just not going to be a good fit, or you'll come across somebody that just, their profile is at the opposite end of the spectrum, that they're probably better off staying in the 9 to 5 job. And, again, there's no point trying to push a round peg into a square peg into a round hole, I guess.
Yeah. No, neat. And it's so true, right? It's that clarity. It seems like that client experience, especially on the entrepreneur side with the franchise, being honest. Hey, it might not be a good fit, and you might actually help that person realize that, okay, hey, I was a little bit off. I don't have what it takes, or maybe you actually clarify for them. So by some of the testing that you're doing, that's awesome. So
and the other part on that as well, I think one of the things that there's obviously a range within the franchise world. If a franchisor is at an early stage, maybe they got 5-10 locations. That often will suit that more entrepreneurial person. The other end of the spectrum, you've got the franchisor that's got 600, 700, 800 locations, where it's kind of the system is just baked. This is how we do it. It's like follow the system and you'll be, you should be successful. And so somebody that's maybe, a little bit more risk averse, often they're better off in that much more mature system because it's proven, and it's kind of the roadmap is much more clear, and it's more more clarity versus that early stage where they're still perfecting the model.
Yeah.
Well, there's more risk.
You're not walking up to McDonald's and McDonald's University going, hey, excuse me, can I put a Thai? I'd like to put some Thai chicken in there or spaghetti.
That would be good though. That would be good.
Actually, it might be a product that they should think about, right? So the next one is E, right? Employee engagement, and it sounds like you put a good team together. I don't know up on the entrepreneur side, franchise side, if you have necessarily a team, because it sounds like you're more independently doing it. But tell us a little bit about what's the culture? What are you doing that's a value proposition to keep your teammates? And you hired this first studio manager. She's still with you 4 years. What do you do? Why is she staying with you guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the best ways to talk about that is to talk about what happened in COVID. I mean, we had to furlough everybody because who the hell knew how long it was going to be. And I think everybody, with one exception, came back when we reopened. And part of what we did was, I spent countless hours trying to help everybody on the team figure out the South Carolina unemployment claim process. And, I think people were just, I think it was a good example of like how we've tried to run, the businesses that kind of not just viewing the team as, hourly employees that kind of come and go. And there is, you definitely get turnover in both of those businesses, but, we've got kind of core parts of the team that have been there now for, in the case of my manager from the start. There's one esthetician who's been there from the start. And I think it's sort of, it's trying to build sort of relationships with them, so they're showing you care, setting them, setting goals, setting challenging goals, but also being that owner that actually knows who they are. And I think that's in that type of business, they, in a lot of cases, they haven't seen that before. So I think it's and again, it's a different. It's not a blue, it's not a white collar environment. It's a lot of the team are kind of living paycheck to paycheck because they've grown up in maybe broken families and things, and it's just you're dealing with a completely different type of employee certainly from my banking days. And I think we try to have a team culture, and I think generally that's proven to be successful.
That's fantastic, right? And in the Go for CEO community, we have a slogan. It's called "Driven by Mindset." And to have the ownership that you took in a critical time like COVID and when everything was uncertain, what a great story to tell. And I'm sure the employees, as other people may entertain working at your locations one day, that's one story they're going to be able to tell and have a lot of heartfelt experience behind it. So pretty awesome. Last one is operational excellence. You kind of tied in the last part of our interview here, but what's maybe a few words that you could say that make you guys, that value proposition of how you do operational excellence?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I think is thinking about it from an owner perspective, it's and again, COVID has kind of forced everybody, I think, in these types of businesses to step back and look at the cost piece really hard. And I think one of the things we've definitely done and seen coming out of COVID is from a P&L perspective. It's actually been a pretty decent 2-3 months because we really squeezed down cost. Looked at when you have to close somewhere, you kind of, it forces you to go look at every single line item and think about is there a better way to do that? Is there a cheaper way? Is there a more cost effective way? Are we running things effectively from a payroll percentage perspective? Can we do away with somebody on the front desk at quieter times and have kind of an AI system that's answering the phone and texting customers and things. So I think for me in those businesses, once you've got the delivery of the customer service and the the product and the customer experience on the one hand, and making sure that's at the top level, but at the same time you're also looking and saying, okay, how do I nail down the cost to to kind of squeeze both ends of the equation from a P&L perspective. So I think that's how I think about operational excellence in those types of businesses, because they're not super high margin businesses, so you need to optimize them. And then I think on the franchise consulting side, it's back to that. I'm at the stage where I can see probably 3-4 months down the line, I'm looking for the first kind of hire in that business. Certainly, if the pipeline keeps building as it is, because there's only I don't want to spend more than a certain amount of time working on it, and I can see I'm starting to think about where do I add somebody that can pick up some parts of the process. So too early to kind of really answer that, I think.
So there's some scalability as well to that. So
I think so.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I mean, you're building within the brand there too, entrepreneur style, and and then adding more value as you go on. So awesome, Jeremy. Hey, look, super appreciative. I know offline we had a little bit of a timing issue, and I appreciate you being flexible. And that's the difference, right? Sometimes in corporate we got to be super rigid and all that type of stuff, but you've been excellent, man. Just the value that you just brought today, super appreciative. I think the Go for CEO community, I hope they engage, and remember everybody, leave a comment here. I know Jeremy will be looking at the channel. We'll be able to comment on it. And if you're in the South Carolina area, you want to reach out to him. Jeremy, can you share a little bit like the websites, the phone numbers that you like the best? Is it LinkedIn? How do you like to interact with people that are reaching out?
I would say find me on LinkedIn. It's just, I think I'm the only Jeremy Bollington on LinkedIn. And then our franchise website is yourfranchiseiswaiting.com. And then obviously if you're in Charleston and you need a wax or you need a blow dry, you know where to find us, Waxing the City and Blow Dry Bar.
Awesome, brother. Well, hey, at the Go for CEO community, what we want to do is really build a following, a tribe behind the interviews that we have. So in 6 to 12 months, we'd love to reconnect with you, share with the audience kind of what's going on in 2021. We'll probably be in that August range or so. We'll book you again and really start to tell people like, hey, here's the next steps. Here's what's going on. Here's the franchise stuff. So super appreciative. Very, very thankful for having you on. Any last words that you'd like to share?
No, I think this is great, John. I appreciate your time. And I think I would just say if anybody's interested in exploring franchise ownership, reach out to me. Or even if you're just interested in understanding more, take a look at my LinkedIn profile. I published a couple of articles about the journey that I had. So you might enjoy reading those. But John, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. And we look
All
forward
right.
to seeing you in about 6 to 12 months.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.